Good evening and welcome back. Tonight we are diving into a different kind of story. Not ancient myths or distant battles, but something closer, something real. The story of a man who spent 25 years living as someone else, who learned to lie so well he forgot how to tell the truth, who infiltrated motorcycle gangs and organized crime families and became so good at betrayal that he nearly destroyed himself in the process. This is a story about undercover work, yes, but more than that, it is a story about identity, about the cost of ambition, about what happens when you trade your life for your career and wake up one day to find that everything you thought mattered has disappeared. As always, let me know where in the world you are listening from. Get cozy, settle in, and let's begin. In the beginning, there was no badge, no alias, no shadow life. There was only a young man at a desk, trapped behind walls that had no windows, filing papers in a room where dreams went to fade. And then, one day, on a Brooklyn stoop, he met a stranger who would change everything. The call. The room had fluorescent lights, the kind that hum with a frequency just below hearing, just above comfort. $8 an hour. That was what they paid him to sit in that windowless space, sorting computer printouts into manila folders. Business and economics degree. 2.1 grade average. No direction, no purpose. Just the soft shuffle of paper and the electric buzz overhead and the creeping certainty that if this was adulthood, if this was what came after college football and Friday nights and the roar of crowds, then something had gone terribly wrong. He was 22 years old. His body remembered other things, the crack of pads on autumn afternoons, the weight of a playbook, the brotherhood of a locker room, Division I football at Lafayette College. Not a powerhouse, perhaps, but it was something. It meant something. And now it was over, and he sat in a room with no windows, and the fluorescent lights hummed their toneless song. The phone rang one afternoon, an old teammate down in the Bronx. The voice on the other end of the line sounded different, alive, electric. Not like someone filing papers or watching clocks or waiting for permission to use the bathroom. "Come visit," the voice said. "You sound miserable." So he went. The Bronx in those days was not the Bronx of now. It was grittier then, sharper edged, less apologetic about what it was. He sat on a stoop with his friend, catching up, talking about nothing. And then a car pulled up, a Corvette, sleek and low and red as fresh blood. The door opened and a man stepped out. He was the coolest looking person the young man had ever seen in his life. This was the Miami Vice era, when style meant something different than it does now. The stranger had long black hair, tan and flowing. He wore an open shirt, no tie, no suit jacket, just the shirt and the confidence and something else, something tucked into his waistband. A Beretta 92F, black and angular and impossible to ignore. The young man stared. The stranger walked into the building. It turned out he was the teammate's brother. He had just returned from Peru. He was a Drug Enforcement Administration agent working undercover. He sat down with a beer, and for 30 minutes, he talked about his life, about the game, about the challenge, about walking into rooms where men carried guns and wore their violence like cologne, and you had to be better than them, sharper than them, quicker on your feet and smoother with your words, or things would go badly. He talked about skill against skill, your ability against theirs. If you were better, they went to prison. If they were better, they sniffed you out. They made you disappear, or they just walked away and you had to start over. It was a contest, a sport, a chess match played with loaded dice and real consequences. The young man listened. As he listened, something shifted. It was not a small thing. It was tectonic. It was the feeling of a door opening in a room you thought had no doors. The skies opened up, someone would later say, and that was close to the truth. Because in that moment, sitting on a Brooklyn stoop with a beer getting warm in his hand, he found his direction. He wanted to be an undercover agent, not a cop. He had never wanted to be a cop. Uniforms and patrols and traffic stops, none of that appealed to him. But this game of wits and nerves and performance, this theater of shadows where you became someone else entirely and walked among criminals as one of them, learning their secrets, earning their trust, and then, when the time was right, bringing them down. This was something. This was a calling. It was not the danger that drew him, though danger would come. It was not the romance, though there was that too. Miami Vice playing on televisions across America, making federal agents look like rock stars. It was the concept itself. The idea that you could test yourself against the worst people in the world, and if you were good enough, if you were smart enough, if you had enough games, you could win. And in winning, you could do something good. You could take violent men off the streets. You could stop the flow of guns into neighborhoods where children played. You could make a difference. He could see it in the agent's eyes, the passion, the fire, the sense that this man was doing something that mattered. And the young man, sitting in that fluorescent room 5 days a week, filing paper after paper after paper, knew with absolute certainty that he had found his path. But paths are not walked in a day. He did not become an undercover agent that afternoon. You do not simply decide to work undercover and then begin. There are gates to pass through. There are years to endure. There is training and proving and patience. Law enforcement had never been on his radar. His family was good, solid, Italian. His mother went to church. His father worked hard. They had raised him right, with love and discipline, and the kind of values that do not make headlines, but build strong men. Now their son wanted to become a federal agent. I wanted to live a double life, wanted to walk among criminals and pretend to be one of them. His father was not thrilled. Most Italians, especially of that generation, had a complicated relationship with the federal government. Trust did not come easy, but the young man had made his choice. From that moment on, everything was in service to the goal. Every job, every test, every interview. He applied, he waited, he applied again. The years stacked up like bricks in a wall. 1 year, 2, 3. It takes time to become a federal agent. It takes longer to become an undercover agent. You pay your dues. You prove yourself. 8 years passed. 8 years from that Brooklyn stoop to the moment he finally began working undercover. 8 years of smaller jobs, of learning the streets, of understanding how criminals think and move and breathe. But the fire never dimmed. If you can walk into a bar, he would later say, and you are not Brad Pitt, but you can pull the hottest woman out of that bar anyway, then you have game. And if you have game, you can work undercover. Because it is all the same. It is all about knowing what to say, when to say it, and most importantly, what not to say. It is about reading a room. It is about making people feel comfortable, even when they should not be. It is about selling a version of yourself that is not quite true, but feels true, and making them believe it so completely that they never question it. This was his gift. He did not know it yet, sitting in that room with no windows, shuffling paper into folders. But the gift was there, waiting, like a seed in winter soil, waiting for spring. And the spring was coming. Years would pass before he stood in a bathroom stall in Savannah with a convicted felon and a loaded gun. Years before he walked into outlaw clubhouses and sat across from mob bosses and bought rockets and machine guns and felt the cold steel of a pistol pressed to his forehead. But all of it, every moment of it, began here, on a Brooklyn stoop, with a beer and a stranger and a Beretta tucked into a waistband. The call had been made. And though he did not know it yet, though he was still filing papers and watching clocks and counting hours until he could leave that fluorescent tomb, his life had already changed. The door had opened, the path had appeared, and there was no going back. In time, he would walk that path all the way to its end. And the end, when it came, would not look anything like he imagined. But for now, remember this: every great journey begins with a moment of recognition, a flash of understanding, a voice that says, "This is what you were meant to do." And on a summer afternoon in Brooklyn, with a Corvette idling at the curb and a stranger with a gun in his waistband, that moment arrived. Nothing would ever be the same. The crucible Los Angeles in the early 1990s was not a city. It was a battlefield where new gods of violence walked among the ruins of the old order. MS-13 had arrived from the south, bringing with them a brutality that even the Bloods and Crips had never known. The young agent arrived in Los Angeles with his badge still bright and his understanding still shallow. He had made it. He had passed through the gates. He was now an Immigration and Naturalization Service agent, which would later become Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And his first assignment was not glamorous. It was not undercover work. It was not kicking down doors or chasing fugitives through alleys at midnight. It was a release line. Los Angeles County Jail. 6 months on the release line. Every foreign-born inmate who walked out those doors had to be interviewed. The job was simple: determine alien deportability. Slap a detainer on them if warranted, process them, move on. In Los Angeles County Jail at that time, 80% of the inmates were foreign-born. 80%. The release line was not a line. It was a river, a flood, an endless procession of faces and stories and crimes that ranged from the mundane to the monstrous. Most agents wanted to move through it as quickly as possible. Interview, detainer, next. Interview, detainer, next. Get the numbers up. Get through the shift. Go home. He was different. He was fascinated. Not by all of them. The man arrested for driving under the influence, the one who had crossed the border looking for work and made a mistake on a Friday night. That man was just a man. Sad, perhaps. Unlucky, but ordinary. There was nothing to learn there. But then there were the others. The ones with MS-13 tattooed across their foreheads. The ones with teardrops inked beneath their eyes, each drop representing a life taken. The ones who had grown up on dirt floors in shacks outside San Salvador, who had somehow made their way north through deserts and checkpoints and coyote networks who had ended up in East Los Angeles and who were now sitting in a jail cell because they had cut someone's head off, because they had dismembered a rival gang member and left the pieces as a message, because they had introduced a level of violence so extreme that even the hardened street gangs of South Central did not know how to respond. These men he wanted to understand. He would sit across from them in the interview room, and instead of rushing through the paperwork, he would ask them questions, real questions. Not about their deportability status, not about their criminal history, though that was part of the file. He asked them about their journey. "Tell me," he would say. "Tell me about this path. How did you get from that little boy in San Salvador, playing in the dirt, held by your mother, loved and fed and protected, to here, to Los Angeles, to this jail cell, to the things you have done?" And when they saw that he was genuinely interested, when they understood that this was not a trick, not some interrogation technique, but actual curiosity, actual desire to understand, they talked. They told him about the civil wars, about the elimination squads, about growing up in a country where violence was not an aberration, but a fact of life, like rain or hunger. They told him about crossing into the United States, about landing in neighborhoods where the only people who looked like them, who spoke their language, who offered any kind of protection or family or structure were the gangs. They told him about being 13 years old and having to choose, join or perish, prove yourself or be nothing. The initiation was not a handshake. It was violence. It was taking a beating from a circle of members or committing a crime so serious that there was no going back, no walking away, no return to civilian life. They told him about the first time they hurt someone, the first time they took a life. Some of them said they did not want to do it, that they had families back home in El Salvador or Guatemala or Honduras, families held hostage by the gang's reach. And if they did not obey, if they did not perform, their mothers or sisters or brothers would pay the price. Not all of them said this. Some were simply violent. Some enjoyed it. But many, when you peeled back the layers, when you sat with them long enough and asked the right questions, revealed themselves to be products of a system so brutal and so inescapable that they had never really had a choice. It fascinated him. He began to see patterns. He began to understand that criminality was not always a moral failing. Sometimes it was a survival strategy. Sometimes it was the only option a person had been given. And while that did not excuse the crimes, while it did not make the violence acceptable or the victims any less gone, it did add complexity. It added dimension. It made the world less black and white and more the color of smoke. The other agents noticed. The gang unit noticed. Here was this new guy, fresh on the job, and instead of treating the release line like a chore, he was treating it like a classroom. He was learning. He was gathering intelligence. He was developing an understanding of how these groups operated, what motivated them, where they came from, what they valued. He would pass along what he learned to the gang unit detectives, tell them about alliances, about feuds, about who was related to who had family back in Central America that could be leveraged, who was high in the structure, and who was just a foot soldier. The detectives saw value in this. They saw that this new agent understood something fundamental. He understood people. They brought him in, the gang unit. They gave him a chance to work with Los Angeles Police Department officers in the Rampart Division, one of the most violent areas of the city. This was during the riots, the early 90s, the absolute peak of gang warfare in Los Angeles. Crips and Bloods and the surging wave of Central American gangs, all colliding in the streets, all fighting for territory and respect and survival. It was, he would later say, the greatest time to be a law enforcement officer in Los Angeles. Not because it was safe, not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Because every day you went to work, you were facing something real, something dangerous, something that required everything you had. The level of violence was extraordinary. MS-13 was introducing tactics that even the established gangs found shocking. They were beheading rivals. They were mutilating bodies. They were using machetes and brutality as psychological warfare, sending messages that echoed back to the civil wars they had fled. The Bloods and the Crips, hardened as they were, accustomed to drive-by shootings and gang warfare, did not know what to make of it, and the young agent was in the middle of it. He rode along on raids. He kicked in doors. He arrested men with weapons and drugs and blood still fresh on their hands. He saw things that most people never see. Violence in its rawest form. Not the sanitized version from movies or television, but the real thing. The bodies, the aftermath, the crying families, the neighborhoods terrorized into silence. And he found it fascinating. Not in a morbid way, not because he enjoyed the suffering, but because it was real, because it was the opposite of that fluorescent room with no windows. Because here, in these streets, life and freedom hung in the balance, and what you did mattered. The men you took off the streets were genuinely dangerous. The guns you seized would have been used. The drugs you confiscated would have destroyed lives. This was not paperwork. This was the game. He learned how to read a room, how to assess threat levels, how to know when someone was lying and when they were telling the truth. He learned the hierarchies within gangs, the codes, the tattoos, the hand signs. But more than anything, he learned about human nature. He learned that the man with MS-13 across his forehead was also someone's son, that the one sitting in the interview room had once been a child, that the path from innocence to violence was not always a straight line, not always a choice freely made. He learned empathy, not the kind of excuses, not the kind that forgives the unforgivable, but the kind that understands, the kind that sees the full picture, the kind that recognizes that if you were born in a different place, raised in different circumstances, subjected to different pressures, you might have walked the same path. This understanding would serve him well in the years to come, because to work undercover, to truly embed yourself in a criminal world, you cannot view the people you are targeting as monsters. You cannot see them as fundamentally different from yourself. You have to see them as human. Flawed, yes. Dangerous, absolutely. But humans. On the release line at Los Angeles County Jail, interviewing men who had committed unspeakable acts, asking them how they got from there to here, he learned to see that humanity. He learned to ask the questions that mattered. He learned to listen, and the gang unit, watching him work, saw something rare. They saw an agent who got it, who understood that this was not just about locking people up. It was about understanding the machine that created them. They saw someone who could move in that world, someone who, if given the chance, could walk among criminals and be believed. But that chance had not yet come. He was still years away from his first undercover assignment. For now, he was learning, watching, listening, building a foundation of understanding that would one day allow him to become someone else entirely. The streets of Los Angeles were his classroom. The inmates on the release line were his teachers. And the lesson was this: violence does not appear from nowhere. It is grown, cultivated, nurtured by circumstance and desperation and the absence of better options. To fight it, you must first understand it. And to understand it, you must be willing to look into the eyes of the men who commit it and ask the simple question that most people never think to ask. How did you get here? In asking that question again and again, he began to understand not just them, but himself, the journey he was on, the man he was becoming, and the price that journey would one day demand. Baptism by fire. The first day is always the hardest, not because of what you know, but because of what you don't. And on his first day in Savannah, before the academy, before the training, before any preparation at all, he walked into a Crystal Burger bathroom with a stranger twice his size and learned what it meant to be afraid. He had finally made it to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives. 8 years after that Brooklyn stoop. 8 years of applications and interviews and waiting and proving himself. 8 years of working at other agencies, other jobs, other cities. Puerto Rico on a fugitive task force, Los Angeles in the gang units. And now, finally, he had landed where he wanted to be. The agency was small, only 2,000 agents nationwide. Harder to get into than most federal law enforcement agencies, and known for one thing above all else. They were cowboys. They were the ones who kicked in doors when doors needed kicking. They were the ones who showed up when there were shootouts. And most importantly, they were the ones who worked undercover. The Los Angeles Police Department officers he had worked with in Rampart Division. Hard men who did not respect federal agents easily, respected ATF. That told him everything he needed to know. He had requested New York, Miami, or Los Angeles. He wanted action. He wanted the cities where the gun crime was worst, where the cartels operated, where the gang violence was thickest. Those were the cities most agents tried to transfer out of. He figured he was a lock. They sent him to Savannah, Georgia. Savannah. But sometimes, fate knows better than we do. His first partner was a man named Randy Beach, who went by his undercover name, Julio Delgado. Randy was, in the most affectionate sense of the word, a lunatic. He had been working undercover for years. He knew the streets of Savannah the way a surgeon knows anatomy. And on the new agent's first day, before he had even been to the academy, before he had received a single hour of formal training in undercover operations, Randy looked at him and asked a simple question. "You want to work undercover?" "Yes." "All right. You're going to do a deal today." The new agent blinked. He had no training, no wire, no idea what he was doing. But Randy was already moving, already making calls, already setting it up. Within hours, the plan was in motion. An informant would bring him to the Crystal Burger. Crystal Burger was the South's version of White Castle. Small, cheap, fast food in a building that had seen better decades. The target was a convicted felon, a member of the Peru gang. He wanted to sell a gun for $250. Simple. Randy handed him $300. The extra $50 was a buffer, in case the price changed, in case the seller got greedy, in case things went sideways and a little extra money smoothed them out. The new agent put the cash in his pocket. He got into his undercover car, brand new, government issued. The informant climbed into the passenger seat. They drove to the Crystal Burger. It was lunchtime. The place was packed. Families, workers on break. The smell of fried food and the buzz of conversation and the bright fluorescent light that made everything look slightly unreal. The informant led him inside. There, standing near the back, was a man. Huge, 6 feet 6 inches tall, maybe more. Broad across the shoulders, the kind of presence that changes the air in a room. The informant walked up to him, made the introduction, and then, without warning, without explanation, the informant turned and walked out the door. The new agent stood there. The big man looked at him, said nothing for a moment, then spoke. "Follow me." He walked toward the bathroom. The new agent followed. The bathroom was small, one sink, one urinal, one stall with a door that latched. The kind of bathroom you find in fast food restaurants everywhere, tiled and functional and smelling faintly of industrial cleaner and something else, something human and less pleasant. The big man opened the stall door. "Go there." The new agent hesitated, just for a second, then stepped inside. The space was tiny. The toilet sat there, porcelain and cold. There was maybe 2 feet of standing room. The big man stepped in behind him and closed the door, latched it. They were face to face, or rather, face to chest. The new agent could feel the man's breath, could smell him, could see the walls closing in around them. The door at their backs, no exit, no way out except through this moment. And in that instant, a thought arrived, clear and cold and perfectly formed. I have made some bad choices today. This was his first day, his first undercover deal. And he was locked in a bathroom stall in a fast food restaurant with a convicted felon who was about to produce a weapon. His options, if things went wrong, were limited, extremely limited. He could not run. There was nowhere to go. He could not call for help. There was no time. Whatever was about to happen would happen in this tiny tiled space, and he would have to deal with it. The big man reached into his waistband. Time slowed. Then the man pulled out the gun. Not to aim for it, not to threaten, but to show it, to sell it. Thank God. The new agent looked at the weapon, looked at the man, pulled out the $300 and handed it over. The man had only asked for $250, but the new agent did not care. He just wanted the gun. I just wanted to get out of that stall. I just wanted to be anywhere else. The man took the money, handed over the gun. They stood there for a moment, the transaction complete, and the new agent had a brief, surreal thought. Was he supposed to stay? Was there protocol for this? Were they supposed to break bread now, sit down at a table, eat a burger together, build rapport? He did not know. So he did what the informant had done. He ran. Not literally, but he walked quickly, out of the stall, out of the bathroom, through the dining area where families were eating and workers were on lunch break, and no one had any idea what had just transpired 15 feet away. out the door, into the sunlight, into his car. He radioed the team, let them know everything was fine. The deal was done. He was heading back to the meet site. Then he drove. The gun sat in the console beside him. Black metal, cold, heavy, real. And something happened. A feeling washed over him that he had never experienced before. Not on the football field, not in the gang units, not anywhere. It was high, a rush, a sense of accomplishment so pure and so powerful that it felt almost chemical. He looked at that gun. That gun had been on the streets. Maybe it had taken lives. Maybe it was about to. Maybe it had been used in robberies or assaults or drive-by shootings. Maybe some kid had been saving up to buy it, planning to use it in an initiation, planning to prove himself by taking a life. But now it was here, in his car, off the streets. And because of that, because of what he had just done, lives might be saved. The violence that guns would have caused would not happen. The chain of suffering it would have created had been broken. He had made a difference. That was the feeling. That was the drug. Not the adrenaline, though there was that too. Not the danger, though he had certainly felt it. But the meaning, the sense of purpose, the knowledge that what he had just done mattered in a way that filing papers in a bank never could, in a way that most jobs never do. He had taken a weapon off the streets with nothing but his wits and $300, and he wanted more. By the time he reached the meet site, by the time he handed the gun over to Randy and filled out the paperwork and debriefed the operation, he knew this was it. This was what he had been looking for since that day on the Brooklyn stoop. This was the life he was meant to live. Randy looked at him, grinned. How'd it feel? The new agent did not have words for it yet, did not know how to articulate the electricity running through his veins, the certainty settling into his bones. Good, he said. It felt good. Randy nodded. He knew. He had felt it too years ago on his own first buy. You'll do this again. It was not a question. And the new agent knew it was true. He would do it again and again and again because that feeling, that sense of purpose and meaning and accomplishment was more addictive than any drug he would ever buy off the streets. It was the reason men like Randy stayed in the game for decades, risking their lives, sacrificing their relationships, giving everything they had. It was the reason he would do the same. The path that had started on a Brooklyn stoop had led him here, to Savannah, to a bathroom stall in a Crystal Burger, to a moment of fear and clarity and triumph. Though he did not know it yet, though he could not see the road ahead, this was just the beginning. There would be hundreds more buys, thousands of guns, years spent in the shadows, becoming other people, living other lives. There would be outlaw clubhouses and cartel meetings and mob sit-downs. There would be betrayal and loss and a reckoning that would nearly destroy him. But all of that was still to come. For now, on this bright Savannah afternoon, with a gun in an evidence bag and adrenaline still singing in his blood, he was simply a young agent who had just completed his first undercover buy. And he was already hungry for the next one. The game had begun, and he was never going to stop playing. Paying the price before you can infiltrate empires, you must master alleyways. Before you can topple kings, you must learn to buy pistols from teenagers in parking lots. This is the way of things. This is how legends pay their dues. The work was not glamorous. It was not what people imagine when they think of undercover agents. It was not tuxedos and martinis and high-stakes poker games in Monte Carlo. It was not even the long-term infiltrations he dreamed of, the months or years spent embedded in motorcycle clubs or cartel operations, becoming part of the furniture, earning trust through patience and performance. It was alleyways, car washes at 2 a.m, shopping mall parking lots where teenagers sold 8 balls of cocaine out of their trunks, quick hits, fast buys, in and out. An informant would make an introduction, a deal would be arranged, money would change hands, and a gun or a bag of drugs would disappear into evidence. This was how you earned your way. Every undercover agent who ever became great, who ever worked the cases that made headlines and took down organizations, started here, in the small deals, the street-level transactions, the world of petty criminals and desperate hustlers and young men who thought they were gangsters, but were really just kids with poor impulse control and worse judgment. Night after night, he went out. He met them in places that smelled of oil and exhaust and stale beer, in the shadows behind convenience stores, under flickering streetlights, in the corners of parking garages where the cameras did not quite reach. He bought pistols, revolvers, semi-automatics, shotguns with the barrels cut down to illegal lengths, guns that had been stolen, guns that had been used, guns that still carried the residue of other crimes, other violence, other stories he would never fully know. He bought drugs, small amounts usually, enough to make a case, enough to add charges. Crack cocaine, most often in those days, methamphetamine, powder cocaine, pills sometimes. Whatever the street was selling, whatever the informants could arrange. Slowly, deal by deal, buy by buy, his reputation began to grow. Word spreads in the criminal world, faster than you might think. A new buyer in town, a guy with money, a guy who does not ask too many questions, a guy who shows up when he says he will, who pays what he promises, who does not bring heat. That kind of reputation is valuable. It opens doors, but building it takes time. It takes consistency. It takes showing up again and again in situations where things could go wrong at any moment. Because not every deal goes smoothly. Not every seller is honest, if such a word can even be applied to illegal transactions. Sometimes they show up with a gun they claim works, but does not. Sometimes they try to rip you off, taking your money and disappearing into the night. Sometimes they show up with friends you were not expecting, friends with their own guns, friends who think maybe robbing a buyer is easier than selling to him. Sometimes they stick a gun in your face. It happened more than once in those early years. A deal arranged in an alley. The seller arrived, looking nervous or angry or high. The sudden movement, the barrel pointed at his forehead or his chest. The question spat out like an accusation. You a cop? In that moment, with a gun inches from your face, you have to make a choice. You have to decide in a fraction of a second whether this kid is serious, whether he is really going to pull the trigger, whether this is a test, a bluff, a robbery attempt, or something worse. Most of the time, it was a test. Most of the time, the gun stayed pointed for a few seconds, long enough to see if you flinched, long enough to see if you panicked, and then it lowered. The deal continued. Or it did not. But either way, you walked away. But standing there, looking down the barrel, you never knew for certain You never knew if this was the time it would go differently. If this kid, strung out or scared, or just young and stupid, would make a mistake, would squeeze the trigger without meaning to, would decide that whatever was about to happen, he could not let you walk away. Those were the moments when doubt crept in. Those were the moments when he thought, maybe this is not for me. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I should go back to kicking doors with a team behind me, where at least you know who the good guys are. But the doubt never lasted, because as soon as the gun lowered, as soon as the deal either completed or fell apart and he walked back to his car, the feeling returned, the high, the sense that he had just navigated something dangerous, something real, and came out the other side, that he had used his wits, his instincts, his game, and survived. And that was the key word, game. If you have a game, he would later say, you can work undercover. And if you do not have game, all the training in the world will not save you. The game is knowing what to say, when to say it, how to say it. It is reading a room in the span of a heartbeat and understanding the dynamics at play. Who is in charge? Who is nervous? Who is looking to prove something? Who is dangerous and who is just posturing? The game is knowing what not to say. It is the pause before you speak. It is the choice to stay quiet when someone is testing you, to let the silence stretch, to show that you are not rattled. It is the ability to lie without looking like you are lying, to tell a story that is not quite true but feels true, because you believe it yourself in the moment you are telling it. Game is the reason some men can walk into a bar and leave with the most beautiful woman in the room, even though they are not the best looking guy there, even though they are not the richest or the funniest or the smoothest. They just have something, a confidence, a presence, an understanding of human nature that allows them to say the right thing at the right time, to make someone feel seen, feel special, feel like this connection is real. Undercover work is the same. You are selling yourself, your story, your persona. The buyer has to believe it completely, or the whole thing falls apart. You have to make them want to be around you. I want to do business with you. I want to trust you, even though trust in the criminal world is a rare and fragile thing. You learn this in the alleyways. You learn it in the car washes. Standing in the fluorescent glow at 3 a.m, negotiating the price of a stolen Glock with a 19-year-old who dropped out of high school and has a teardrop tattoo that he probably did not earn. You learn it in the parking lots, sitting in your car, watching a guy approach with a bag in his hand, trying to determine in the seconds before he reaches your window whether he is serious or whether this is a setup. You learn to read people, not through coursework or training manuals, though those have their place, but through repetition, through exposure, through hours and hours of standing in uncomfortable places with uncomfortable people, navigating uncomfortable situations and finding a way to make it work. Slowly, his skills sharpened. He learned to dress right, not too clean, because that raised suspicions, but not too dirty either, because that made you look desperate. He learned to carry himself with a certain casual confidence, not aggressive, not a tough guy, just someone who belonged, someone who had done this before and would do it again. He learned the rhythms of negotiation, when to push, when to back off, when to walk away from a deal because something felt wrong, and when to proceed even though his instincts were screaming at him to leave. He learned patience, because the game is long. A buy that falls through tonight might come together next week. A seller who ghosts you might call back a month later with something better. A bad deal that goes sideways might, paradoxically, enhance your reputation, because word gets out that you did not snitch, did not bring the cops, just moved on. Through it all, he kept the faith. He knew this was temporary, this grinding, repetitive, dangerous work in parking lots and alleyways. This was the apprenticeship, the foundation, the necessary step before he could move on to the cases he really wanted. The long-term infiltrations, the deep cover operations, the work that Jay Dobbins and Chris Basich and John Ciccone were doing, taking down entire organizations, spending months or years inside criminal worlds, living double lives at a level that required not just skill, but complete immersion. That was the goal. Every gun he bought brought him closer. Every deal he completed added another line to his resume, another story he could tell when the call came. Because the call would come, eventually. The big agencies, the task forces working the major cases, were always looking for undercover agents, good ones, reliable ones who had proven they could handle the pressure. He was proving it, one alleyway at a time, one car wash, one parking lot, one gun pulled from a waistband in the dark, one bag of cocaine passed through a car window, one 8-ball, one pistol, one stolen rifle with the serial numbers filed off. The work was small, but the reputation was growing. Reputation in this world was everything. It was the currency that bought you entry into bigger games. It was the credential that got you noticed. It was the foundation upon which everything else would be built. So he kept going out, kept making deals, kept walking into situations where things could go wrong at any second, where a gun might be pointed at his face, where a kid high on adrenaline and bad decisions might make a choice that ended everything. Every time he walked away, every time the deal completed or fell apart, but he made it back to his car in one piece, he felt it again. That feeling, that high, that sense of purpose that nothing else in his life had ever provided. He was building something, brick by brick, deal by deal, gun by gun. Though he could not know it yet, though the future was still unwritten, he was becoming exactly what he had dreamed of that day on the Brooklyn stoop. He was becoming an undercover agent, not in title only, but in skill, in instinct, in the hard-earned wisdom that comes only from doing the work, facing the fear, and walking through it anyway. The alleyways were his training ground, the parking lots, his classroom, and the criminals he met there, young and old, smart and foolish, dangerous and desperate. They were his teachers. The lesson was always the same. If you have game, you survive. If you do not, you do not belong here. He had a game, and soon, very soon, the world would see just how good he really was. The doctor's wife. Not all evil wears a mask. Sometimes it wears a white coat and carries a stethoscope. Sometimes he speaks softly and golfs on Wednesdays. And sometimes, in a parking lot in South Georgia, it asks you to commit the unthinkable. The case came to him the way most cases do. A phone call, a request, an informant with information about someone who wanted someone else gone. In this line of work, violence for hire investigations are not uncommon. People talk. They say things in moments of anger or desperation or drunken rage. I hate my wife. I wish she was gone. I would pay someone to make her disappear. Most of the time, it is just talk. Most of the time, people do not mean it. They are venting. They are fantasizing. They are letting the pressure valve release before they do something they cannot take back. When you investigate these cases, when you dig into them, you find that there is no real intent. Just words, just heat, just a bad month or a bad year or a marriage that has curdled into something toxic but not yet lethal. But sometimes it is real. This time, the man asking for the act was not a street thug, not a gang member or a drug dealer or someone living on society's margins. He was a doctor, successful, respected, wealthy. He treated professional athletes. He was the physician for the Ladies Professional Golf Association Tour. His name was known. His reputation is solid. He lived in the part of South Georgia where people spoke in soft drawls and belonged to country clubs and understood the value of discretion. This was not the profile. When you work undercover long enough, you develop a sense of what different criminals look like. The gangbanger has a certain energy, the mobster a different one, the drug dealer, the gun runner, the biker. They all carry themselves in ways that become recognizable. You learn to spot them, to read them. But the doctor did not fit any known pattern. He was clean, well-dressed, articulate. He had soft hands, the kind that had never swung a hammer or thrown a punch. He drove a nice car. He lived in a nice house. He had built a nice life, and he wanted his wife gone. The informant made the introduction. The setup was simple. The doctor believed he was meeting a professional. Someone with experience, someone cold and efficient, someone who would do the job for money and then disappear, leaving no trail, no connection, no evidence. The agent agreed to play the role. They met in a parking lot. Neutral ground. Public enough to feel safe. Private enough to talk. The kind of place where two men could sit in a car for 20 minutes and no one would think twice about it. The doctor arrived on time, climbed into the passenger seat, looked at the agent with eyes that were calm, steady, evaluating. Then he started talking. He talked about his wife, about how much he hated her, about how the marriage had become unbearable, about how divorce was not an option, not with the way the finances were structured, not with what it would cost him. He talked about wanting her gone, permanently. The agent listened. As he listened, he began to ask questions. Not the questions you might expect, not logistical questions about method or timeline or payment, but questions designed to give the doctor a way out. Are you sure about this? The doctor nodded. Because once I do this, you cannot put the toothpaste back in the tube. You understand that, right? Once it is done, it is done. There is no undoing it. I understand. People say things when they are angry, when they are frustrated. I have had people sit where you are sitting and tell me they want someone gone. And then, a week later, they call me back and say, "Forget it. We worked it out. I was just upset." That is fine. I would rather you back out now than regret it later. I am not backing out. The agent studied him, tried to see past the calm exterior, past the doctor's professional demeanor, to whatever was underneath. Because he genuinely wanted to know, was this man serious? Or was he just someone having the worst stretch of his life, someone who needed help, not handcuffs? The truth is, there are very few people in this world who are purely evil. Most people, even those who do terrible things, have reasons, have context, have moments where, if you had caught them at a different time, offered them a different path, things might have gone differently. The agent wanted to be sure. He gave the doctor another out, and another. He made it clear that walking away was an option, that no one would judge him, that people get overwhelmed, get desperate, say things they do not mean. But the doctor did not waver. As the conversation continued, as the doctor laid out what he wanted, how he wanted it done, when he wanted it done, the agent began to feel something. Not uncertainty, but a cold certainty. This man meant it. The hatred coming off him was palpable. It was not the hot anger of someone in the middle of a fight. It was cold, calculated, the kind of hatred that has been nursed over months or years, that has hardened into something dense and immovable. He wanted his wife gone, and he was willing to pay for it. The agent asked about the money. The doctor did not hesitate, named a figure, agreed to provide half up front, half after the job was done, spoke about it the way you might discuss hiring a contractor to remodel your kitchen. Businesslike, transactional. Then, as the meeting was winding down, the agent learned something else. This was not the doctor's first wife. There had been another. Years ago, she had been found in a bathtub, 7 or 8 inches of water. Her upper body above the waterline. The autopsy had been inconclusive. The investigation had gone nowhere. This was South Georgia, after all. A small community, a good old boy network. The doctor was well known, well liked, a pillar of the community. No charges had ever been filed. The official conclusion was that it had been an accident, or perhaps a medical event. Something sudden, something tragic but not criminal. But now, sitting in this parking lot, listening to this man talk about ending his current wife's life with the same calm, measured tone he might use to discuss a golf game, the agent wondered. He wondered about that bathtub, about that first wife, about what had really happened in that house when no one else was watching. He wondered if the doctor had done this before. The meeting ended. The doctor left. The agent sat in his car for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. This was not like buying guns in alleyways. These were not quick hits and street-level dealers. This was something different. This was a man who lived in the light, who shook hands and smiled and treated golfers' injuries, asking for a service that belonged in the darkest corners of human behavior. The disparity was unsettling because it forced a reckoning with an uncomfortable truth. Evil does not always look like evil. It does not always announce itself. Sometimes it wears nice clothes and drives a nice car and speaks in complete sentences. Sometimes it sits across from you in a parking lot and calmly discusses the logistics of ending a human life as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. The case moved forward. The evidence was gathered. The doctor was arrested. When it all came out, when the community learned what their respected physician had tried to do, there was shock, disbelief. How could he? He seemed so normal, so successful, so unlike the kind of person who would do something like this. But that was the lesson. Criminality is not confined to bad neighborhoods. It does not only live in the hearts of gang members and drug dealers and outlaw bikers. It lives everywhere, in every zip code, in every profession, in every stratum of society. It lives in the hearts of doctors and lawyers and businessmen. It lives in gated communities and country clubs and houses with well-manicured lawns. It lives beside us, often invisible, until the moment it reveals itself. When you work undercover, when you spend years navigating the criminal world, you learn to see it. You learn to recognize the signs, the cold calculation, the absence of empathy, the willingness to do harm for personal gain. But recognizing it does not make it less disturbing, especially when it comes wrapped in respectability, when it shakes your hand with soft, clean fingers, when it speaks in the measured tones of someone accustomed to being listened to, being believed, being trusted. The doctor went to prison. The case was closed. Another person with harmful intent off the streets. Another life saved. But the image lingered. The parking lot, the calm voice, the hatred, cold and patient and certain, and the bathtub, always the bathtub. The first wife found in shallow water, her passing ruled inconclusive, her story lost to time, and the gentle protections afforded to men of standing in small southern towns. The agent would work many more cases, would meet many more criminals, would see many more shades of evil, from the explosive violence of the streets to the quiet cruelty of white-collar crime. But this one stayed with him because it taught him something fundamental, that you can never know what lives in another person's heart, that the face someone shows the world may bear no resemblance to what lies beneath, that evil is not a costume you put on, it is a choice you make. And some people, given the right circumstances and the wrong motivations, will make that choice while never once looking like monsters. They will look like doctors, like neighbors, like the kind of person you would trust with your life. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying thing of all. Not the violence itself, but its ordinariness. Its ability to hide in plain sight, its patient willingness to wait for the right moment, the right opportunity, the right person in the right parking lot. The doctor had found his person, or so he thought, but the man sitting across from him, listening patiently, giving him every chance to back out, was not there to take a life. He was there to save one, and in the end, that was exactly what he did. The Outlaws. In 1999, the phone rang with an assignment that would test everything he thought he knew. The Outlaws Motorcycle Club, Atlanta, Georgia. And the only reason he got the call was because he had a motorcycle license, earned from 6 months on a Yamaha Virago when he was 18 years old. The conversation was brief. We need someone for a biker case. You ride? I have a motorcycle endorsement on my license. Good. You're in. What they did not ask, and what he did not volunteer, was that he had not been on a motorcycle in years, that the Yamaha Virago he had owned for those 6 months was nothing like a Harley Davidson, that he knew nothing about outlaw motorcycle culture, nothing about their rules or hierarchy or codes, that he had never been inside a 1% clubhouse and had no idea what to expect. He hung up the phone and immediately called a friend up north, someone who did ride Harleys, someone who knew bikes. Hey, quick question. On a Harley, when you shift, is it 1 down and then 4 up? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Dude, what are you getting yourself into? Good question. He drove from Savannah to Atlanta with a knot in his stomach and a head full of information he had tried to absorb in the span of a few days. Harley Davidson motorcycles, the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, the 1%er world, so called because they represented the 1% of bikers who lived outside the law, who rejected mainstream society, who operated by their own rules. They were not a social club. They were a criminal organization, and they were dangerous. The setup was this. There was already an ATF agent undercover with the Outlaws. His partner, a task force officer from the sheriff's department, had been pulled out. The case was escalating. The Outlaws had invited them to Bike Week in Daytona, and the sheriff's department had decided that was too deep, too dangerous, too far outside what they had signed up for. So the undercover agent needed a new partner. And the call had gone out. And somehow, it had landed on a young agent in Savannah whose only qualification was a motorcycle license he barely deserved. When he arrived in Atlanta, he met the team, the undercover agent, 2 informants, big men, heavily tattooed, with the look of people who had spent years in this world. They gave him a bike, not a beginner's bike, not something forgiving or easy to handle, a chopper, hardtail, raked out, the kind of motorcycle that looks impressive and rides like a wild animal. He stared at it. Do you know how to start it? He did not. They showed him. Kickstart, timing, throttle control, all the small details that experienced riders do without thinking and beginners struggle with. Then they said the words that filled him with dread. Follow us. We're going to the clubhouse. It was nighttime. A light mist hung in the air, the kind that makes roads slick and visibility poor. They were in the North Georgia mountains, where the roads curve and dip and rise without warning. And they took off. He followed the taillights. I tried to keep up, tried to remember everything they had just told him about the bike. But the chopper was unfamiliar. The roads were dark. The mist turned to a light rain. Then he went into a turn. He felt the bike slip, felt the tires lose their grip, felt the moment when control stopped being an option and gravity took over. He went down. The bike went down, and he slid. 50 yards, maybe more. Metal scraping pavement, his body tumbling. The world was a blur of asphalt and wetness, and the sick certainty that this was not how he had imagined his first day on a biker case going. He came to rest in a ditch, lay there for a moment, checking himself. Road rash, cuts, bruises, but nothing was broken, nothing that would not heal. By the time he got to his feet, the others had realized he was not behind them and had turned back. They found him in the ditch, the bike on its side, both of them wet and battered and pathetic looking. The big informant, the one who had never liked him, looked at the scene. I looked at him. Then I looked at the undercover agent. You want us to take this motherfucker into the outlaw clubhouse? He can't even ride a motorcycle. The words hung there in the damp air. At that moment, he had a choice. He could agree, could say, you know what, you're right, this was a mistake. Maybe I should sit this one out. Could go back to Savannah with his tail between his legs and his pride in pieces. Or he could do something else. He walked over to the bike. It was heavy. Chopper frames are not light, and this one had landed hard. But he bent down, got his hands under it, and lifted, bent the mirrors back into place, checked the engine, kicked it over until it started. Then he looked at them. Let's go. They helped him get the bike out of the ditch, and they rode on, through the rain, through the dark, to the clubhouse. 1% clubhouses are not welcoming places. They are fortresses, sanctuaries, places where the rules of the outside world do not apply. And the Outlaws Clubhouse in Atlanta was no exception. It was dark, not just poorly lit, but deliberately shadowed. The kind of darkness that feels intentional. That makes you aware you are being watched even when you cannot see who is watching. It was dirty. Not in the way a garage is dirty, with grease and tools and the honest grime of work, but in a way that suggested neglect, decay, a place where cleaning was not a priority because appearances did not matter, and it felt evil. That is the only word for it. There was a general feeling of malevolence, a sense that bad things had happened in this space and would happen again, that violence lived here, that the men who gathered here were not playing at being outlaws. They were the real thing. The agent walked in, soaked and scraped and feeling very much out of his depth, and he made a decision. He did not swagger, did not try to act tough, did not puff out his chest or adopt the body language of someone trying to prove something. He stood against the wall. For 45 minutes, he did not say a word. He just stood there and watched. I watched how the men interacted. I watched the body language, watch who deferred to whom. I watched who spoke and who listened. Watched the president, a man whose authority was so clear that it needed no announcement, as he moved through the room and the others reacted to his presence. He learned more in those 45 minutes than he could have learned in a week of briefings. Then, when he felt he had seen enough, when he understood at least the basic hierarchy, he walked over to the president. The room quieted. Everyone watched. He looked the president in the eye, and he spoke. "Sir, I don't know anything about your culture. I don't know anything about your rules, and I certainly don't want to offend you or anyone else here. I just want to learn. I want to become one of you someday, and I want you to teach me." It was the truth, or at least a version of it. He did want to learn. He did want to understand this world, and by framing it as a request for mentorship, by appealing to the president's ego, by positioning himself not as a threat, but as a blank slate, he gave the man something valuable: control. The president saw this big, young, somewhat battered-looking guy who had just crashed his bike and still showed up, who stood quietly instead of talking too much, who approached him with respect, who was asking to be molded, and he loved it. He took the agent under his wing, made him his project, his favorite, and in doing so, made the informant, the one who had questioned whether the agent should even be there, hate him even more. But it also made everything easier, because now the agent had protection, had an endorsement, had the president's favor, which in that world was currency more valuable than gold. That first night, after everything that had happened, after the crash and the ditch and the 45 minutes of silence, the agent learned the most important lesson of his undercover career. Do not go in as a tough guy. It is tempting. When you are about to walk into a room full of dangerous men, men who have committed violence, men who value strength and dominance, it is tempting to try to match them, to act hard, to project toughness, to make them think you are just as dangerous as they are. But they will see through it. These men are not stupid. They are sharp. They are street smart. They have survived in a world that does not forgive weakness or tolerate fakes. They can smell fraud, can sense when someone is performing. And if you come in pounding your chest, trying to prove yourself, they will either call your bluff or sniff you out. But if you come in with humility, if you show respect, if you make it clear that you are there to learn from them, They will teach you. They will bring you in. They will trust you because you have given them what every powerful person wants, the satisfaction of being the one who knows, the one who guides, the one who shapes. The agent had not planned this. He had not strategized it in advance. But standing there in that clubhouse, bruised and wet and unsure, he had followed his instincts. And his instincts had been correct. By the time the case ended, months later, he had become part of that world, had ridden with them, had earned their trust, had gathered the evidence needed to build a case, and he had done it not by being tougher than them, but by being smarter, by understanding human nature, by knowing that the best way to infiltrate is not through force, but through connection. That night in the Outlaws clubhouse, dripping rainwater on the concrete floor, watching and learning, and then asking to be taught, he had taken his first real step into the world of long-term undercover work. The crash in the ditch, the moment that could have ended everything, became instead the foundation, because it had taught him humility, had shown him that he could fail, could fall, could look foolish, and still pick himself up and keep going. In that lesson, painful as it was, he had found the key to everything that would come after. Not strength, not toughness, not bravado, but the quiet courage to be vulnerable, to admit what you do not know, to ask for help, to let someone else be the teacher. That was the game, and he had just learned how to play it. Blood brothers. They were heroes before he ever met them. Jay Dobbins, Chris Basich, John Babyface Ciccone, the rock stars of undercover work. And now, for the first time, they were calling him in. Arizona, a home invasion crew, bombs and rocket-propelled grenades, 2 weeks of insanity, and a strip club incident that nearly ended everything. In the world of undercover work, there are names that carry weight, names that other agents speak with a mixture of respect and awe, names that represent not just skill, but a certain fearlessness, a willingness to go deeper, stay longer, risk more than anyone else. Jay Dobbins was one of those names. Chris Basich was another. And John Ciccone, called Babyface for reasons that had nothing to do with his appearance and everything to do with an old case, completed the trinity. These were the men who did the long-term infiltrations, the cases that took months or years, the deep cover operations where you stopped being an agent and became, for all intents and purposes, a member of the organization you were targeting. They had worked for the Hells Angels, the Mongols, major cartel operations. They had built identities so complete, so thoroughly backstopped, that even the most paranoid criminals believed them. They were legends. And the young agent, still relatively new to undercover work, still proving himself in parking lots and alleyways, had studied their cases the way a musician studies the masters, had read their reports. I had heard their stories, had dreamed of one day doing the kind of work they did. Then the phone rang. Jay Dobbins was on the other end. He had a case going in Arizona, a home invasion crew, bad guys, the kind who did not just rob houses, but brought violence and terror with them, the kind who had access to serious weapons. Jay had been working with them for a while, building trust, making buys, kilos of cocaine, explosives, bombs, actual pipe bombs, the kind that could level a building. And now he needed help. He told the bad guys he had his own crew, his own people, and he wanted to bring them in for one final job, a big home invasion, something that would require manpower and skill, and the kind of coordination that single operators could not manage alone. The bad guys agreed. Jay made the call to agents he trusted, agents who had proven themselves. And the young agent from Savannah was one of them. "You're coming to Arizona." The words were magic, an invitation, a validation, proof that his work in the parking lots and alleyways had been noticed, that his reputation, small as it was, had reached the ears of people who mattered. He flew to Phoenix. The heat hit him the moment he stepped off the plane. Arizona in summer is not hot the way other places know heat. It is a physical presence, a weight, the kind of temperature that makes you question whether humans were meant to live in this climate. But he barely noticed, because waiting for him at the airport were the bad guys. Not Jay, not Chris, not the team, the targets themselves. They were picking him up, driving him, and from the moment he walked off that plane, he was in a role. He was not an agent. He was part of Jay's crew. A criminal, a professional, someone who could be trusted to help with whatever came next. The next 2 weeks were a blur. Jay ran operations the way a maestro conducts an orchestra. Every move is calculated. Every interaction is purposeful. He had built a world around these bad guys, a reality so complete that they never questioned it. And now, the young agent was part of that reality. They bought guns, not pistols or hunting rifles, but serious weapons. The kind that make prosecutors' eyes light up and defense attorneys nervous. They bought drugs, kilos, real weight, the kind of quantities that trigger mandatory minimums and federal sentencing guidelines that measure prison time in decades. They bought explosives, pipe bombs, devices designed to destroy property and end lives. Then, in a transaction that seemed almost surreal, they bought a rocket-propelled grenade, an RPG, not a replica, not a prop, a functional, military-grade, shoulder-fired anti-tank weapon, the kind of thing you see in war zones, not suburban Phoenix, the kind of thing that should not be in civilian hands under any circumstances. Who, the agent wondered, is selling rocket-propelled grenades in Arizona? But there it was, and they bought it, and the evidence was logged. The case continued to build. Through it all, Jay was a force of nature, over the top in every way, loud, charismatic, completely committed to the role he was playing. He had built a persona that was larger than life, and the bad guys ate it up. They loved him, trusted him. I wanted to be around him. The young agent watched and learned. This was not a parking lot deal. This was artistry. This was method acting taken to its logical extreme. Jay did not just pretend to be a criminal. He inhabited the role so completely that the line between performance and reality blurred. Then came last night, the night before the takedown, the night that would become legend among the undercover community for reasons no one could have predicted. Jay had arranged for the final meeting to take place at a strip club. This was not unusual. Criminals do business in strip clubs. The music is loud, which makes surveillance difficult. The atmosphere is permissive, which makes people careless. And for the bad guys, it feels like celebration, like success, like the beginning of something big. But Jay had another reason for choosing that location. He wanted to throw a bone to the special response team. The tactical officers who provide security for undercover operations. These men sit in vehicles or hide in buildings or crouch in uncomfortable positions for hours, watching, waiting, ready to move if things go wrong. It is tedious work, stressful work, and they never get to be part of the fun. So Jay figured, let them cover us from inside a strip club. Let them enjoy the scenery while they work. It was a small gesture. Thank you. But someone had to wear the wire. Someone had to carry all the recording and monitoring equipment. All the technical gear that would capture the conversation, the negotiations, the final pieces of evidence needed to make the case. Jay looked at the young agent. You're wearing it. It was Arizona, in summer, which meant it was 110 degrees outside and not much cooler inside. And the equipment was not small. The Nagra recorder they used in those days was the size of a thick paperback book, plus microphones, plus battery packs, plus all the wiring that connected everything together. And he was wearing a t-shirt and jeans. There was nowhere to hide it except his crotch. So that is where it went. All of it, stuffed into his pants, bulky and uncomfortable and obvious if anyone looked too closely. He walked into that strip club looking like he was smuggling a small appliance. The meeting went well. The bad guys were happy. The deal was coming together. Everything was on track. Then Jay, because Jay could never resist a moment of theater, sent a stripper over to give the young agent a lap dance. The goal was simple. Make him uncomfortable. Make him squirm. Remind him that even though he was here with legends, even though he was part of this operation, he was still the new guy, still the one they could mess with. The stripper approached. I started dancing, and the young agent sat there, sweating, trying not to think about the recording equipment pressed against his body, trying not to think about how absurd the situation was, trying to maintain his composure. But then he had an idea. When the dance was over, he leaned in close to her. How much did he give you for that? $20. Here's 40. I want you to do something for me. Go give him a dance. But he's kind of kinky. So when you're done, give him a little slap in the face. She looked at where he was pointing. At Jay. Big, loud, charismatic Jay, sitting across the room, grinning. Okay. She walked over, started dancing for him. And Jay, realizing what was happening, realizing that the tables had turned, started to laugh. This was good. This was the kind of prank he could appreciate. The dance went on. Then she finished. And then, out of nowhere, she wound up and delivered a right hook that would have made Mike Tyson proud. She was wearing rings, heavy rings, the kind that are decorative but also dangerous. And she caught Jay square in the cheekbone with everything she had. The sound was audible over the music. Blood sprayed. Not a little, a lot. It arced through the air, splattered across the table, across the floor, across everything within a 3-foot radius. Jay's face split open. A gash that went deep, that exposed bone, that bled with the kind of profusion that makes people panic. The young agent sat frozen, watching, thinking in that moment, one very clear thought. My undercover career is over. He had crossed a line, had taken a joke too far, had caused a legend, a man he admired, a man who had brought him onto this case as a favor to get his face busted open in a strip club the night before a major takedown. There would be no more calls after this, no more invitations, no more chances to work with the best. He had blown it. The special response team agents who were supposed to be providing security rushed in, not because of a threat, but because one of their undercover agents was bleeding everywhere and needed medical attention, and they could not take him to a hospital because that would raise questions, would create records, would potentially compromise the case. So they did what had to be done. They sutured him in the bathroom, in the stall, in the strip club, with Jay sitting there, blood still dripping, while someone stitched his face back together with the kind of field medicine that would make a nurse weep. The young agent did not know what to do. He found a quiet corner, tried to make himself invisible, tried to process what had just happened and what it meant for his future. The takedown happened the next day. It went smoothly. The bad guys were arrested. The evidence was solid. The case was a success. But Jay was not speaking to him. Not a word, not a glance, nothing. The young agent packed his things, prepared to fly back to Savannah, and he found Chris Basich. Did I just end my career? Chris looked at him. I thought about it. Listen, he said, these things happen. Bird gets over things. Just give it time. But the young agent did not believe him, could not believe him. How do you get over having your face split open by a stripper the night before a takedown? He flew home, waited. I wondered if the phone would ever ring again. Then, weeks later, it did. It was Jay, and he was laughing. The story had spread through the undercover community, had become legend, had been told and retold at conferences and training sessions and wherever undercover agents gathered. And Jay, to his credit, had embraced it, had turned it into a story he told himself, had forgiven the young agent, or at least decided that the humor outweighed the harm. You're good, he said. We'll work again. And they did. Many times over the years, the young agent would go on to work dozens of cases with Jay and Chris and the rest of that crew, would become part of that brotherhood, would earn his place not just through skill, but through the shared experience of chaos and danger and moments that could have gone very wrong, but somehow turned into stories instead. But that night in the strip club, with blood on the floor and a legend getting stitched up in a bathroom stall, he learned something important. In this world, in the world of undercover work, you are only as good as the people who vouch for you, the people who bring you in, the people who trust you with their lives and their cases and their reputations. Sometimes you screw up. Sometimes you take a joke too far. Sometimes you cause problems you did not intend. But if the people around you are good people, if they understand that this work is hard and strange and sometimes absurd, they forgive you. They give you another chance. They let you back in, and you become family, not by blood, but by something stronger, by shared danger, shared stories, shared scars, by blood on a strip club floor and laughter that comes later when the stitches have healed and the story has been polished smooth by retelling. That was the brotherhood, and from that night forward, he was part of it. Street theatre. The storefront operation is an art form. You do not just buy guns and wait. You create a world, a business, a life. You embed yourself in a community drowning in violence, and you open a door that looks like salvation but leads to prison. And to make it work, you must become an actor, a director, and a playwright all at once. By this point in his career, the agent had proven himself. He had worked the parking lots and the alleyways. He had infiltrated the Outlaws. He had worked alongside legends in Arizona. His name was circulating in the right circles. His reputation was solid. And now, he was ready for something bigger. Storefront operations are complex undertakings. They require planning, resources, coordination between multiple agencies, and most importantly, justification. The government does not simply set up fake businesses on a whim. There must be a reason, a demonstrated need. The process begins with data, statistics on gun violence in a specific area, numbers showing shootings, homicides, gun recoveries, maps that highlight the neighborhoods where the problem is worst, where trigger pullers operate with impunity, where guns flow like water, bought and sold and traded with such frequency that law enforcement cannot keep up using traditional methods. Once the data justifies it, once the case can be made that a storefront operation is necessary, the planning begins. A location is chosen, usually a small business in a high-crime area, something that fits the neighborhood, something that will not raise suspicion. A tattoo shop, a pawn shop, a check-cashing store, a place where people come and go, where transactions happen quickly, where no one asks too many questions. The business is purchased or leased. It is staffed entirely by undercover agents, and it opens for business, real business, because that is the key. The storefront cannot just pretend to operate. It must actually function, must serve real customers, must become part of the community's fabric. The tattoo shop must give real tattoos. The pawn shop must accept real items. The operation must look, feel, and smell authentic. Because the people coming through the door are not fools. They are street smart. They have survived in environments where trust is rare and deception common, and they will know instinctively if something is off. So the agents learn the businesses they are pretending to run. They give tattoos, they fix jewelry, they cash checks, they become part of the neighborhood, and they wait, because word spreads. In criminal communities, information moves through networks built on relationships, reputation, and rumor. When a new business opens, when new faces appear, people pay attention. They watch, they listen, they ask questions. Who are these guys? Where did they come from? What is their hustle? Eventually, someone tests the waters, comes in with something to sell, a gun usually. Ask if the shop might be interested, and the shop says yes. The first buy is always the most important, because it sets the tone. It establishes credibility. If the buyer haggles too much, the seller gets suspicious. If the buyer seems too eager, same problem. The price has to be right. The demeanor has to be casual, professional. The kind of transaction that both parties walk away from feeling satisfied. When that first buy goes well, when the seller walks out with cash and the buyer walks out with a gun and no one gets arrested, the word goes out. These guys are solid. They buy guns, they pay fair prices, they do not bring heat. Then the floodgates open. In Augusta, Georgia, the agent ran a tattoo shop for 12 months. In that time, they bought 430 crime guns. 430. In 1 year, in one location, from one neighborhood. The number is staggering. It speaks to the sheer volume of illegal firearms circulating in American communities. It speaks to how easy it is to buy and sell weapons outside the legal system. And it speaks to how effective storefront operations can be when done correctly. But buying guns is only part of the operation, because eventually people start asking questions. What are you doing with all these guns? Where are they going? Why do you keep buying? Cops do not buy guns. They arrest people who sell guns. So if you are buying this many weapons, you must be doing something with them. This is where the hustle comes in. The agent's cover story was simple and believable. He was from New York, specifically Brooklyn, and he had connections up north. People who wanted guns, people who would pay a premium. The economics were real. A pistol you could buy in Georgia for $100 could be sold on the streets of Brooklyn for $1,500. That was not an exaggeration. That was the actual price differential. Because New York has strict gun laws, supply is limited, demand is high. And when supply is scarce and demand is abundant, prices rise. So the story was that he would buy guns in Georgia, transport them to New York, and sell them for 15 times what he paid. It was a hustle everyone understood. It made perfect sense. It explained why he kept buying. And to make the story more convincing, he showed them how he did it. Street theater. The concept is simple. You bring in undercover agents from other offices, other task forces, other cities. They pose as buyers or sellers. And you conduct fake transactions in front of the bad guys you are targeting. The effect is powerful. Let's say the agent has been buying guns from a local gang for a few weeks. The gang members are starting to trust him, but they are still watching, still evaluating, still wondering if this is too good to be true. So the agent tells them he has a big deal coming. Some bikers from out of state, they want to buy 20 machine guns, but he does not trust these guys. He has never dealt with them before, so he needs security. He needs people to post up during the deal, make sure nothing goes sideways, and he offers to pay them good money, just to be there, just to watch his back. The gang members agree, because this is what they do. This is their world, providing muscle, providing security, protecting transactions. The day of the deal arrives. The gang members show up. They are armed because of course they are. They take their positions by the door, by the windows, wherever the agent tells them. Then the buyers arrive, undercover agents playing the role of outlaw bikers, big guys covered in tattoos, riding Harleys, looking every bit the part. They come in, they examine the merchandise, real machine guns, pulled from evidence, temporarily released for this operation. 20 of them, laid out on a table. The deal is conducted. Money changes hands, a suitcase full of cash. The bikers take the guns. They load them into their van. They leave. The gang members have just watched their guy move 20 machine guns and collect what looks like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they tell everyone. Word spreads through the community. These guys are for real. They are moving serious weight. They have connections. They have money. They can be trusted. The operation grows. More guns, more sellers, more introductions. The spiderweb expands, connecting one group to another, one seller to the next, until the operation is pulling in weapons from all over the region. But there is a darker side to the street theater, a detail that sits uncomfortably in the mind when you think about it too long. The gang members who provided security, who posted up during the fake deal, who were armed because they thought they were protecting a real transaction, have just committed a federal crime, bringing a firearm to a drug trafficking offense. Or in this case, what they believed was a drug or weapons trafficking offense. Mandatory minimum, 5 years added to whatever sentence they eventually receive. It does not matter that the deal was fake. It does not matter that the drugs or guns were not real, or that the buyers were federal agents. What matters is that they showed up with weapons, intending to participate in what they believed was a criminal transaction. And the law, in its cold arithmetic, counts that as a crime. The agent knew this, understood it. I used it. Later, when the cases went to trial, when the sentences were handed down, when gang members who thought they were just providing security found themselves facing 5 additional years in federal prison, he would think about it. Not with regret exactly, because these were not innocent people. They were armed criminals who made a choice to participate in what they thought was a major illegal transaction. They would have provided the same security for a real deal, would have used those same guns to protect real criminals, moving real weapons that would have caused real harm. But still, it was a trick, a trap, a legal mechanism that felt, in some fundamental way, unsporting. This was the machinery of justice, efficient, effective, built on statutes and sentencing guidelines and the willingness to use every tool available to take dangerous people off the streets. But it was not always pretty. The storefront operations were extraordinarily successful. 430 guns in Augusta, similar numbers in other cities, hundreds of arrests, thousands of weapons taken off the streets, lives saved, though you could never quantify exactly how many. But success came with complications. Because the agent was spending months in these communities, getting to know people, learning their stories, seeing them not just as targets, but as human beings. Some of the people who walked through those doors were genuinely bad, violent, remorseless, the kind of criminals who would sell guns to anyone, knowing those weapons would be used to take lives and not caring as long as they got paid. But others were different. Others were products of their environment. Kids who grew up in neighborhoods where violence was normal, where guns were currency, where joining a gang was not a choice so much as a survival strategy. They were smart, creative, capable, and if they had been born in a different zip code, raised in a different family, given different opportunities, they might have become engineers or entrepreneurs or teachers. But they were not born in different zip codes. They were born here, in these neighborhoods, where the schools were failing and the jobs were scarce, and the only people offering structure and family and purpose were the gangs. Now they were walking into a tattoo shop, selling a gun, thinking they were making a business transaction with someone who understood their world, not knowing they were sealing their own fate. The agent would sit in those shops day after day, building relationships, earning trust, buying guns, and he would think about the cost. Not the cost to him, though that was real, but the cost to them. The years they would spend in prison, the families they would leave behind, the children who would grow up without parents, the cycle perpetuating itself, generation after generation. He did not make excuses for them, did not pretend they were victims with no agency. They had made choices, bad choices, choices that put weapons into the hands of people who used them to hurt and harm. But he saw the complexity, saw that crime was not always a moral failing. Sometimes it was a response to circumstance, a rational choice in an irrational world. That knowledge, that understanding would stay with him, would color everything that came after, would make the betrayals, when they came, cut deeper than they otherwise might have. Because it is one thing to betray a monster, it is another thing entirely to betray someone you understand, someone whose story you know, someone who, in another life, might have been your friend. The storefront operations were the most effective tool law enforcement had for taking guns off the streets. They worked, undeniably. Measurably, hundreds of weapons, hundreds of arrests. Communities were made safer, at least temporarily, by the removal of the people moving those guns. But effectiveness does not always equal simplicity, and success does not always feel clean. The agent would go on to run more storefronts, to refine the technique, to build better covers, better theater, better operations. He would become one of the best in the country at this work, but he would never forget the faces of the people who walked through those doors, the ones who trusted him, the ones who thought they had found someone who understood their world, the ones who had no idea they were talking to a ghost, a shadow, a man who would take their guns and their freedom and disappear into the machinery of the federal justice system, leaving nothing behind but evidence and empty chairs in courtrooms. That was the price of the work. Not dangerous, not fear, but knowledge, the burden of understanding the people you betray and carrying that understanding with you long after the cases close and the sentences are served and the storefronts shut their doors for the last time. Good kids in bad places. Somewhere along the way, a strange thing happened. The monsters began to look like men. The enemies began to feel like friends. And the line between good and evil, once so clear, started to blur like breath on winter glass. It happened gradually, not in a single moment, but across hundreds of small interactions. Overnights spent in storefronts and afternoons in parking lots and long conversations that had nothing to do with guns or drugs or the cases being built. Conversations about life, about family, about dreams that had been deferred or forgotten or never allowed to exist in the first place. The agent had always been curious about people. That was what had made him good at this work. His fascination with the MS-13 member in the Los Angeles jail, his questions about how someone gets from a dirt floor in San Salvador to a cell in East LA. That curiosity had never left him. Now, spending months at a time embedded in communities, running storefronts, building relationships, he was getting answers to questions he had not even known to ask. He was learning that criminals were not a monolithic group, that there was extraordinary diversity within that world, extraordinary range. Some were genuinely bad, sociopaths, people who enjoyed causing pain, who would hurt you for no reason other than it amused them, who saw other human beings as objects to be used or discarded. Those people existed. Working undercover, you met them. You learned to recognize them. The coldness in their eyes, the absence of empathy, the willingness to do terrible things without hesitation or remorse. But they were the minority. Most of the people he met, most of the men and women who walked through the storefront doors selling guns or drugs were not monsters. They were just people. Complicated, flawed, often desperate people who had made bad choices or been born into situations where good choices were not available. They were kids who had grown up in neighborhoods where violence was normal, where gunshots were background noise. where you learned to drop to the ground when you heard certain sounds, the way other kids learned to look both ways before crossing the street. They were young men who had watched their fathers go to prison or disappear or pass away, who had no male role models except the gang members on the corner, who had been recruited at 12 or 13, not because they wanted to join, but because joining offered protection and structure and something approximating family. They were smart. That was what surprised him most. How intelligent many of them were. How creative. How capable of complex thought and strategic planning. If you had transplanted them into a different environment, given them different opportunities, different mentors, different paths, they could have excelled at anything. But they were here, in these neighborhoods, in this life, and the only hustle available to them, the only way they knew to make money, to gain respect, to survive, was crime. The agent would sit in the storefront, talking with them, and he would think, this guy should be running a business. This guy should be in college. This guy has a mind that could solve problems, build things, and create value in the world. But instead, he is selling stolen guns. And in a few months, when this operation closes, he is going to prison. For years, maybe decades. That knowledge sat heavily, especially when he started noticing the disparities. Federal sentencing guidelines are not kind. They are mechanical, mathematical. You plug in the offense, the quantity, the criminal history, and out comes a number, a range. And the judge has some discretion, but not much. The numbers did not always make sense. A man would sell him 3 guns, pistols. Maybe one of them had been used in a crime, maybe not. That man would get 3 years, maybe 5 if he had priors, but 3 to 5 years for 3 guns. Another man would sell him 52 ounces of crack cocaine, just over 3 pounds, and that man would get 24 years. 24 years for crack, 3 years for guns. The disparity was jarring, especially when the agent knew from his time in Los Angeles, from his time on the streets, that the guns often did more immediate damage. A gun in the wrong hands takes lives, quickly, definitively. A bullet does not care about your story or your circumstances, or whether you intended to pull the trigger. It just ends things. Crack cocaine destroys too, but more slowly. And the user, at some level, is making a choice. A terrible choice. Often driven by addiction or despair or forces beyond their control. But a choice nonetheless. The gun's victim does not get a choice. And yet the sentencing guidelines, in their cold arithmetic, punished crack dealers far more harshly than gun sellers. It was a relic of the 1980s, the war on drugs, the moral panic around crack that had swept through America and resulted in laws that were, in hindsight, deeply flawed. Laws that created massive racial disparities in the prison system. Laws that took young black men and locked them away for decades, while white cocaine users in suburbs received treatment and second chances. The agent was not a social justice warrior. He was not an activist. He was a federal officer doing his job. But he had eyes. He could see. And what he saw did not always sit comfortably. He watched a 20-year-old kid, smart, articulate, someone who had made a series of bad decisions, but was not fundamentally different from kids in better neighborhoods who got caught with drugs and received probation, get sentenced to 2 decades in federal prison. And he thought, is this right? Is this just? Is this making anyone safer? He did not have answers, only questions. The questions multiplied as the cases piled up, because he was getting to know these people, not as targets, not as case numbers, but as individuals. He knew which ones had kids, which ones were trying to get out of life but did not know how, which ones sent money home to their mothers, or took care of younger siblings, or carried photographs in their wallets of family members they were trying to protect. He knew their stories, their histories, their fears and hopes, and the small kindnesses they showed when no one was watching. And some of them, if he was being honest, he liked. There were men who would have jumped in front of a bullet for him, men who trusted him so completely, who brought him so deeply into their world that they would have given their lives to protect him, and they would have done it before some of his own colleagues would have. That was a hard truth to swallow, but it was true. He knew it. I felt it. There were moments in those storefronts, in those long months of operation, when the relationships became real, when the boundaries blurred, when the performance of being Sal, the undercover persona, became so complete that the person he was pretending to be felt more authentic than the person he actually was. The people in that world, the criminals he was targeting, they saw Sal. They trusted Sal. They cared about Sal, not knowing that Sal was a lie, a construct, a ghost who would vanish the moment the operation ended, leaving them holding charges and facing sentences and wondering how they had been so completely deceived. The community reactions after takedowns were complicated. When a storefront operation shut down, when the arrests happened, when the truth came out, the neighborhood did not always celebrate. Sometimes they were angry, not at the criminals who had been arrested, at the agents who had lied, because people had come to know them, had come into the tattoo shop or the pawn shop or whatever business was running, and had met these guys. I had talked to them, had decided they were good people, solid, the kind of neighbors you could trust. Finding out they were federal agents was a betrayal, a personal one. The agent had genuinely enjoyed those conversations, those relationships, those moments of connection. And knowing that those connections were built on lies, that the trust he had earned was in service of sending them to prison, that hurt. Because it is one thing to betray a monster. It is another thing entirely to betray someone you understand. The doubts were growing, not about the people he was targeting. He knew many of them had done real harm, had put guns into circulation that had taken lives, but about the system, about the sentencing guidelines that punish some crimes far more harshly than others, about the fundamental question of whether punishment alone ever really fixed anything. The betrayals, when they came, cut deeper. The satisfaction he once felt after a successful buy, after taking another gun off the streets, was now mixed with something else, something heavier, grief maybe, for the people whose lives he was ending, for the families who would suffer. He had become good at this work by learning to see criminals as human. But that same understanding made the betrayal harder to bear, because monsters are easy to betray. But friends, even friends you know you are going to betray, even friends who exist only because you created them, those betrayals cut deep. With each case, with each takedown, with each sentencing hearing, the cuts accumulated, small wounds that never quite healed. that would, in time, become something he could no longer ignore. He told himself it was necessary, but he carried the knowledge of what that meant and learned to live with it. For now, the betrayal Chicago, the outfit, the outlaws, two empires working together, and one man who stood at the intersection. His name does not matter now. What matters is that he trusted the wrong person. And on his 40th birthday, in a strip club, he raised a glass to the one man he thought he could trust. The call came from Chris Basich. Chris had a case, a big one. The target was unique, a member of the Chicago outfit, but also an outlaw. This man was the bridge between them. He owned a jewelry store, Goldberg Jewelers. In reality, it was a hub, a meeting place where members of different criminal organizations could sit down and conduct business. Getting close to him was nearly impossible. Multiple agents had tried and failed. Chris had an idea. The agent would pose as a down-and-out mixed martial arts fighter. How do you get an introduction? Chris had found something perfect. Gold dental crowns. But not just any crowns. Crowns that still had blood on them. The agent walked into Goldberg Jewelers carrying a small bag. He showed him the crowns. The man picked one up, saw the blood. A small smile crossed his face. The door cracked open. He went back, again and again, each time with something small. Slowly, over weeks and months, the relationship deepened. The man introduced him to his son. The agent met them both, and he saw something that surprised him. This man, this mob-connected outlaw biker, was a good father. He was patient with his son. There was love there. Then came the night that would haunt the agent for years. The man wanted to meet at a strip club. The agent showed up. They talked. Then the man raised his glass. It was his 40th birthday, and the man said something simple, something devastating. I can't trust the people I grew up with, the people around me in my life, so I appreciate you being here. The agent looked at him. I saw the sincerity, and the agent thought, boy, you picked the wrong person. The weight of it was crushing, because he knew what was coming. The evidence was strong. The decision was made to attempt a flip. The agent and his partner were instructed to bring the man to a hotel room for a fake meeting. The man brought his son. They walked into the room. Instead of a meeting, there were federal agents, boxes filled with evidence. The man went still. The agents laid out the charges, 60 years, enough time to ensure he would never see his son again. They offered him a deal, cooperate. He said nothing. The agent was sent in. He pulled out his badge. Listen, this is not personal. I had a job to do. The man's expression did not change, but his eyes did. Something hardened there. Really, it's not personal. I brought you into my family. You know I brought you into my home. Every single thing that you have said to me up to this point has been a lie. And it's not personal? The agent had no response. The man was right. It was the most personal thing in the world. The agent walked out. There was nothing more to say. The case went to trial. The evidence was overwhelming. The man was convicted. 60 years. Federal time. The agent sat in the courtroom during sentencing. He could not look at the man because he knew what he would see there. Disappointment. The man had trusted him. And it had all been a lie. That level of betrayal was what this work required, and the agent had believed he could handle it. But he had been wrong. This one stayed with him. The son standing there watching his father realize he had been played. The agent started to feel it then. The erosion, the cracks formed in the wall that separated who he was from who he pretended to be. Sal, the persona, was becoming more real than Lou, the man beneath. The man went to prison. The conviction was celebrated. But the agent carried the knowledge that betrayal, when done completely, destroys not just the target. It destroys the betrayer too. A little bit, a piece at a time. Until one day you look in the mirror and realize you are not sure who is looking back. 2 lives. 1 man. By the end, there were 2 men living in one body. Lou Vieth, federal agent, husband, father, and Sal Nunziato, gangster, hustler, the man everybody loved. And somewhere in the years between badge and alias, Lou began to disappear. Sal was so much easier to be. At first, the line was clear. You went to work, you became Sal. You went home, you became Lou. But over time, the line blurred. Sal's life was more interesting than Lou's. Sal walked into rooms and people wanted to know him. Lou filed reports, dealt with bureaucracy. Sal was free, even though freedom was an illusion. The agent spent more time as Sal. Let the persona seep into the spaces where Lou used to be. It was erosion. Then came the night that made it impossible to ignore. He was drunk in a clubhouse, biker territory. They told him to lie down on the pool table. It was filthy. He did it. A huge man climbed on top of him with a dirty tattoo gun. A needle that had been used before. The man began to tattoo the agent. The agent lay there. The pain dulled. And in the fog of alcohol, the agent had a moment of clarity. My mother would be so disgusted with me right now. How did I get here? It was the same question he had asked the MS-13 member. Now he was asking it about himself. The answer was uncomfortable. He had become like them. Not in deed, but in the erosion of his values, in the willingness to compromise, in the slow surrender of the person he had been. He was becoming Sal. And Sal did not have a family. That freedom was seductive. The danger was internal, psychological. The danger of losing yourself so completely in a role that you forget it is a role, that you become the mask you wear. The tattoo is finished. He sat up. I looked at the fresh, ugly ink on his skin. A brand, proof that you belonged. He looked at himself in the mirror and did not recognize the man looking back. That man had hard eyes, looked an awful lot like the criminals he had spent his career studying. He did not stop, because stopping would mean walking away from Sal. And Sal was who he was now. He told himself that when the right time came, he would be able to take off the mask and be himself again. But deep down, he knew that was a lie. There was no taking off the mask when the mask had become your face. The absent father. To be great at undercover work, you must put it first, always, above health, above friends, above family. The 2 things, greatness and family, are mutually exclusive. He became a father during the years his work was accelerating. If undercover work is going to be done well, it must come first, always. If you hesitate, the criminals will notice. So you choose the work every time, and you tell yourself it is temporary. But the cases never really end, and the family keeps waiting. His wife was strong, but she was carrying everything. She did it alone. Even when he was home, he was not really home. His body was present, but his mind was elsewhere. The children felt it. Dad was not at the recital. If you were not there, you were not there. The absence of compounds. One missed moment leads to another. That is the real cost. the acceptance, the moment when they stop caring whether you show up because they never expected you to be there in the first place. He was a visitor in his own home, a stranger with his own family. He had created a void where a father should have been. He had taught his children that they came second. He told himself he was making the world safer. But in making the world safer, he had made his home less whole. He saw that his wife had built a life that functioned without him. She had made him optional. That realization was more painful than any gun pointed at your head. But he did not stop, because he did not know how to be anyone else. The work was who he was, and without it, he was nothing. The fool. After 25 years of selling out criminals, buying into lies, living in shadows, the tables turned. And when they did, they turned with a fury he never saw coming. The fall happened slowly until he hit bottom. The affair was not planned. She was a federal prosecutor. The relationship should have been reported. It was not. When it came out, everything unraveled. Fast, the press found out. His name was public. The Office of Inspector General, OIG, took over the investigation. The agency could not protect him. The US Attorney's Office, where he had worked dozens of cases, turned their backs. Silence, cold and absolute. He had always believed the system would protect him. Now the system was coming after him. His body began to shut down. He stopped eating. 52 pounds gone. The phone stopped ringing. The silence was deafening. The sound of isolation. Dark thoughts arrived. He could not bear the idea that his children would carry the shame of their father being disgraced. He went to a psychiatrist. His undercover brothers flew to Georgia, taking turns sitting with him, making sure he did not slip away. Then his wife came to the psychiatrist's office. She had every reason to walk away, but she came. And she said the thing that saved his life. If you're thinking about doing something stupid, I'm going to make sure your son knows. I'm going to make sure he knows that his dad let him down. The words cut through everything. He would not be a quitter. He would not be a coward. That day in the psychiatrist's office became the floor, the bottom. The fall stopped. The only direction left was up. He made a choice to stay in the fight. He would be there to face the consequences. He had to find Vieth somewhere beneath the wreckage of Sal Nunziato. Rebuilding the temple. You cannot rebuild with words. You can only rebuild with time and action. He was 50 years old when he retired, 26 years on the job, cleared of all wrongdoing, retired with honors. But everything was silent. The silence was the first thing to adjust to. He did not know what to do with himself. He began the hardest work of his life, rebuilding his family. His wife had stayed, but she had not forgiven. He knew he had to earn it through action, not words. He began with small things, being home, fully present. He did the dishes, made dinner, went to the parent-teacher conferences. At first, his presence was awkward. His children were distant. He just showed up, day after day. Slowly, things began to shift. His children started including him. His wife watched him be present. She began to soften. The crisis had been a gift. It had forced a reckoning. He was done living as someone else. He realized the work would have consumed him. His wife's forgiveness came slowly. His children's forgiveness came in moments of inclusion. He realized he was happy, not the adrenaline high, but something quieter, deeper, more sustainable. He was a husband, a father, a man with a family who knew him, not Sal, but Lou. He had learned the work does not love you back, but family is what matters. He had learned that you cannot trade your life for your career and expect to come out whole. He carried the hard-earned wisdom forward. He was alive, present, trying. The outlaw and the agent. There is an old cartoon where a sheepdog and a wolf battle all day, then clock out at night and walk away as friends. This is the story of how an undercover agent and an outlaw biker, men who spent their lives trying to destroy each other, became brothers. The introduction came through Chris Basich. Chris had worked a case against the Outlaws. One of the targets was Mel Chansey. Mel was a legend. The scariest outlaw biker who had ever roamed the face of the earth. Chris built the case. Mel went to prison. But Chris did something unusual. He stayed in touch with Mel's mother. Through those years, Chris and Mel, agent and outlaw, became friends. When Mel was released, Chris was there. The agent drove to Mel's house. Mel was huge, but his eyes were kind. His smile was genuine. They talked about life. The agent saw something in Mel he recognized. They had both lived double lives. Both had paid a price. Mel had done his time. He had emerged with a positive outlook. He was proof that redemption was not just possible, but inevitable. Mel became one of his biggest inspirations. Proof that you can fall and survive. The agent wrote a book. It led to the speaking circuit. He stood in front of officers and told them what he had learned. The most important thing in your career is your pension. To collect that pension, to make the government pay you for all the years you gave them, you have to be alive. You have to be healthy. You have to survive. And the secret, take care of yourself. Not the job, yourself. The job is not more important than your life. He would tell them his numbers. 26 years on the job. His goal now, to collect that pension for 27 years. The audiences would listen, some with recognition. And Mel, sitting in the audience sometimes, was proof. The wolf and the sheepdog. They were both Italian. Both had survived. They had found kinship. The agent had learned it is never too late. You can always come back. You can always rebuild. He had been a good agent, but he was a better person now, a better husband, a better father, because he was present. And so the story ends. Not with thunder or glory, but quietly, the way most true stories end, with a man sitting in his home, surrounded by family, carrying scars that will never fully heal, but have finally stopped bleeding, with silence that is no longer empty, with presence that is no longer performance. We began on a Brooklyn stoop, a young man, a flash of purpose, and we have ended here, decades later. The career finished. The man himself, Lou, standing in the light for perhaps the first time in his adult life. The cost of becoming anyone is that you stop being someone. The cost of mastering deception is that your real life fades. The agent saw his betrayal in Chicago. The 40-year-old man trusted the wrong person. The 60-year sentence, then the fall. The crisis that nearly ended him. The truth that saved his life. Your children will carry your decisions whether you were there to help them or not. He found his way home, and in finding it, he discovered that home was not a place. It was a presence, the choice made daily to be fully where you are. The final lesson: presence matters more than performance. Relationships matter more than reputation. The people who know your real name matter more than the ones who only know your alias. Be present. That is all. That is everything. Be present. And with that truth, with that hard-earned wisdom, we release you into sleep. May you rest well. May you wake refreshed. May you remember what matters. And may you choose tomorrow and every day after to be present for it. Good night.